Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Ladies and gentlemen, it was murder, pure and simple. I don't want to hear that some police officer who murders somebody gets off with having suspension and a loss of pay and allowances for a couple of months. This guy ought to be tried for murder, and the one who stood by should be tried as an accessory to murder. It isn't a question of mercy. It isn't a question of love and forgiveness. It's a question of trying a murderer for a killing. And this cop killed a man in Minneapolis. There was no question about it. The man was not resisting. He was in handcuffs. The officer had his knee on his neck. The man was crying out he couldn't breathe, and he died. He died at the hands of a reckless police officer who himself had been disciplined. This isn't some civil rights thing. We shouldn't have all this rioting and all that business. They ought to just try him. It's just that simple. He ought to be tried for murder. And the guy who stood by should be tried as an accessory to murder. And then I am pro-police, ladies and gentlemen. I really believe law and order is important. The police officers do a great service for the nation. And I am pleased to report that we have here competent police officers on our staff who are trained and they are well qualified. But I think to have somebody who is disciplined himself for misconduct, to leave him on the police force, and then to see that thing, this man had not been convicted of a crime. His only offense was potentially passing a bad check, and that had not been proved in court. And he was not resisting arrest. He was not fighting or doing anything else. And in this case, it's just simple. Try that police officer for murder, and the man who was standing by as accessory to murder. And once that happens, then you'll send a message, you guys have got to play by the book. And if indeed they are attacked by somebody, then they need to use force. They are given weapons, they are given clubs, they are given training. But this is something that we need to deal with. That's my solution. And yes, be merciful, but we don't need a whole bunch of protests. I mean, you know, but the black community needs to know that the law is on their side. But this thing says, no, the law is not on your side. The law is against you. And the law should be for them. We have law, the same law for black people, white people, Asians, Latin Americans, all the rest of it. We shouldn't be one kind of law in America. And now apparently the president is going to take to see the justice is done. We hope. Jenna Browder has the story.
Protests turned violent in Minneapolis overnight, with one man killed, as people across the country continue to demand justice for George Floyd.
Just like they killed that white woman over north.
Demonstrators clashing with police, businesses looted, and this auto zone set on fire. But many demonstrators marching peacefully.
And are literally marching through traffic.
And in L.A., protesters stopped freeway traffic. They also gathered in Houston, where Floyd grew up. Cameras captured the final moments of Floyd's life. Floyd unarmed and handcuffed, with a white police officer kneeling on his neck as he says, "I can't breathe." After about 5 minutes, he stops breathing and appears unconscious. The officer's knee still on his neck. Police were on the scene responding to a call about a forged check used at a store. All 4 officers have been fired, and now the mayor of Minneapolis is calling for that one officer to be arrested and charged.
What we witnessed on that video was hard. The notion that you or I would have been put in jail upon doing something like that, and he was not, it's just wrong.
Derek Chauvin, the officer who was kneeling on Floyd's neck, had reportedly received multiple complaints about police conduct during his 19-year career, but no disciplinary action was taken against him. President Trump was asked about Floyd's death yesterday in Florida.
Well, we're going to look at it, and we're going to get a report tomorrow when we get back. And we're going to get a very full report, but a very sad day.
The president later tweeting he had ordered investigations into Floyd's death by the FBI and Justice Department. And faith leaders are speaking out too. On Twitter, Franklin Graham, "This makes me sick to my stomach. What took place yesterday on a Minneapolis street by the Minneapolis PD should deeply concern each and every American." And award-winning Christian artist Lecrae with this video on Instagram.
What we're experiencing out here right now in this world is pure unadulterated evil.
And saying people should be angry, but adding,
Use that anger to be constructive. Use it for prayer, for policy changes, for programs that we can get involved in to change the way that things are right now. Be characterized by your love and productivity. And don't let hatred and bitterness where you are, because then evil wins.
Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thanks, Jenna. I'm sure this thing is going to come up, but I mean, you don't deal with this by protests, by burning down stores and having riots. That's not the answer. But the answer is to take it quickly. And the mayor of Minneapolis needs to move quickly. He needs to convene a grand jury and get on with it immediately and let the black community know that the law and order is on their side. And then those policemen need to be trained. And if there are any bad apples in the group, they need to be fired. You know, that's the ones you fire, not wait till they kill somebody and then say, well, we're going to take them off the force. Take them off quickly. And there needs to be personnel reduction all the way across the board in these police departments because they have an awesome responsibility and they are that thin blue line that keeps us from violence. And we want police. We want to help the police. We want to do everything we can to support the police. I am a great supporter of the police. And I think that all of us should be, but at the same time, we cannot allow anything like this to happen. It was so blatant. And the fact that there was a video that cop didn't realize that there was somebody taking pictures of him doing what he was doing, horrible. We cannot have this in America. We cannot have it anymore. You know, I personally was kneeling in prayer with a group of young black teenagers in the city of Portsmouth, Virginia, and I was charged by a police dog. I know what it feels like to be on the other end of that. And I don't blame these kids. I mean, it was peaceful. We were praying. We had reached out to these young people, and they were on their knees coming to Jesus. And we got charged by a police dog with his mouth, open and his fangs. And the police cruiser pulled up beside us and it charged us with dogs. That's the way it used to be down here, and I don't like that. We're not going to have that in any other part of the country. And today, by the way, is the anniversary of a terrible shooting that took place in Virginia Beach. We'll tell you about it later, when a disgruntled worker in the bureaucracy got loose and killed a number. How many people? It was 11 people. So
it was I don't remember the exact number, but it was a tragic
It was
day.
a horrible slaughter. We'll talk about that more. Well, in other news, the coronavirus is still taking a terrible toll on our economy. George Thomas brings us the latest numbers from our CBN newsroom.
Thank you, Pat. You're exactly right. Jobless claims were up again in today's latest government report as another 2.1 million people filed for unemployment benefits. That makes some 41 million applications since the lockdown began. Today's numbers, as you know, come as the U.S. death toll from COVID-19 has now passed 100,000. Turning overseas, folks, now from India and Pakistan to Africa and the Middle East. Farmers are facing a perfect storm. Already struggling with crippling coronavirus lockdowns, they now face billions of locusts devouring crops and putting millions at risk. Here's a look at the havoc they are causing. This was the scene in parts of northern and central India this week as billions of desert locusts descended. It's India's worst infestation in a quarter century, causing unprecedented devastation as the migratory pests devoured hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland.
The problem with the locust group is that they eat up the leaves of crops standing in the agricultural fields. It also hurts animals subsequently.
Indian farmers banged pots and pans to ward off the dangerous insects, to no avail. The government in New Delhi dispatched teams to spray insecticide, but the damage was already done. The insects swarmed Pakistan earlier in the week before heading east. The Food and Agriculture Organization says a relatively small swarm covering close to half a square mile can include up to 80 million locusts and travel 150 miles in a single day. A group monitoring the insects in India reported at least 10 such swarms chewing through crops as of Wednesday, and it's only going to get worse. Heavy rains and the cyclone season in June are expected to see the swarms multiply. As we have reported, the food supplies and livelihoods of millions across Africa and Middle East also remain under threat. This UN map shows the locust infestation spreading from the Horn of Africa across the Arabian Gulf to Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and to parts of Iran and Afghanistan. Somalia among the hardest hit countries. Recent flooding, locusts, and the pandemic posing a triple threat there. The government in Mogadishu declaring a national emergency.
The consequences for Somalia are acute. Even before COVID, more than 5 million Somalis required humanitarian assistance.
The desert locust forecast between now and late July shows the infestation continuing to pose a serious threat to large areas of Africa, Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent. Pat, the UN is saying unusual weather in the Arabian desert is allowing these pesky critters to mushroom.
Thank you, George. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got to look at the fact from the biblical point of view. A plague of locusts was considered a judgment of God. And it just looks like when these things are cascading, it's like God himself is bringing judgment upon the nation. The trouble is that the people who are hardest hit are the most vulnerable, the poor. And all across Africa, there's going to be tremendous famine. This now is bringing it into India, tremendous famine. These people will not have enough food to eat. They'll be starving. And the locusts are bringing famine, and the coronavirus is bringing plague. And before long, there will be a war because the nations will begin to rise up against one another. India and China are already at each other's throats, and it looks like a confrontation may be taking place up in the mountain areas. And the world is being convulsed. And I do think that we ought to ask ourselves to the Lord, God, what are you telling us? What are you saying with this terrible famine, the terrible plague, and the terrible financial crisis that is confronting the world? And if a war comes on top of it, you read in Ezekiel and you read in other the prophets about what happens when God sends these plagues on the earth. And did it come from him? Is he sending this plague of locusts, or is it just something that's happening? Well, I would like to think that maybe the Lord is in charge of this world, and we need to cry out to him and say, God Almighty, spare this world in which we live. George.
Pat, here at home this Sunday, Virginia Beach, Virginia will mark 1 year since a city employee fatally shot 12 people and wounded 4 others. For many survivors, first responders, and even the mayor, it has been a painful year. My colleague Heather Sells brings us that story.
Tia Howell was leaving Building 1 on that Friday afternoon, May 31st, when another Virginia Beach city employee called her to come back.
She actually saved my life because as I was getting ready to walk out, it was reported that the shooter was actually in the same parking lot that I parked in, and he actually shot someone right where my car was parked.
Howell, a city financial administrator and young mom, immediately ran to the first-floor mailroom.
I remember just sitting under that desk, just praying and crying, and I even tried to reach out to my parents to tell them that, you know, I love them. I didn't know what was going to happen because we didn't get any information. It was just dark, black, and they just kept telling us to be quiet.
Mayor Bobby Dyer was headed home after work when his assistant called with the news.
She said there's an active shooter on our campus. And then I started getting phone calls. You know, there was a fatality. There were more fatalities.
The gunman killed 12 people before police shot him. He died later at a local hospital, leaving a host of unanswered questions as multiple investigations have found no motive. 1 year later, victims and survivors still carry visible and invisible wounds, and that includes the mayor.
After the dust settled and, You know, after a while, I had to get some counseling myself. You know, it's, you know, you got to be, you know, as a leader, you got to be strong at times, but you also have to be human at times.
In the beginning, I thought that I could handle it. However, I found myself sitting at my desk, crying most of the time. Oftentimes, my coworkers would come into my office crying. We would go into each other's offices crying. And that lasted at least about a good 3 to 4 months of continually crying and just lamenting over the coworkers that we lost.
Howell also sought counseling, received a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, and had to leave her job. And she's not alone, so the city has provided free counseling for anyone affected.
This month, Virginia Beach painted a giant forget-me-not symbol at a local park, but it had to cancel its memorial events planned for this weekend in light of COVID restrictions.
Instead, it's offering an online remembrance, and the mayor wants victims and survivors to know they are not forgotten.
We will embrace these people in perpetuity. We will eventually come together, but you know, this was the worst day in the history of Virginia Beach, and we intend to continue to show honor and respect for those affected.
Howell says she still experiences fear when she walks into public buildings, but she's thankful to God for the healing he has already provided.
The word is true. If you pray and seek his face, he really, really, really will help you and calm your fears.
Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thank you, Heather. By the way, Pat, Virginia Beach city officials are urging folks to wear blue tomorrow in remembrance of the victims and those who lost their lives.
Thank you, George. It was a tragic day for this city. You think, well, happens in L.A., it happens in Chicago. Here in Virginia Beach, you wouldn't think it would happen, but it does. There's violence everywhere in this world, and well, we mourn those who passed on and who were needlessly killed, but there have been so many. There was a shooting out there in Las Vegas that was so tragic, and you go through the list of what people can do, but again, it's not guns that shoot people, it's people who shoot people. And it's a tragedy that this thing's happening. But I guess violence is a part of the natural life. Men have been killing each other since Cain slew Abel, so it's not anything new.
But in our society today, it seems so out of the norm and should.
Well, out of the norm, but I don't know. We've had so many of these things, but so often, from what I've found, many of these people who do these extreme acts are themselves taking some kind of antidepressant. And I think that the link between the antidepressants and violence should be explored, it should be determined, and we should moderate the use of these things, because many of these people at Virginia Tech, there was a killing. Other places where there have been people who've been deranged who get a gun and begin to shoot people. And it's just heartbreaking to see it happen. But anyhow, in Virginia Beach, we mourn the passing of these people. Was the number, again,
you said 11,
12,
I think it was 12.
12?
Yeah, and this Sunday will be the actual anniversary.
And Bobby Dyer is a graduate of Regent University, and he has a doctorate in organizational leadership, and we're very proud of him as the mayor of the city.
Great job.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Okay, well.